At Bay Market Cafe, we know life can get in the way of good food, so we're here to offer a hand. Online ordering is back, and this time, it's better than ever. If you overslept and are running out of time, order online and pick it up. Raining? Get it delivered. On your way to go there or do that, order and pick it up. Sun scorching? Meeting? Get it delivered. That way, you can spend more time doing this or that with him, her, they, and them. So whether you need your morning coffee, you're craving a red velvet donut, ramen, a lamb burger, or a falafel pita, order the food you love and skip the line. Pick it up or have it delivered. That's Bay Market Online.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us for the 6th of 19 candidate forums for the 2021 general elections in the Cayman Islands, being hosted by the Cayman Islands Chamber of Commerce in association with Foster's. My name is Mike Gibbs, and I'm the current president of the Chamber of Commerce. I will also be one of the panelists asking the questions this evening, along with Mr. Shamari Scott, president-elect of the Chamber. I'd like to begin my opening comments by welcoming each of the Red Bay candidates, Samuel Jackson and Alden McLaughlin, and thanking them for accepting the Chamber's invitation to participate in this forum. Your willingness to appear on the same platform demonstrates to voters that you take the democratic process seriously and are ready to respond to a series of questions on the top issues as identified by a recent online Chamber survey. More than 400 responses and more than 200 questions have been submitted via the survey, and these will help to frame the questions for this evening's forum. There is certainly not enough time to ask all the questions, but we will do our best to cover the topics that have been identified as most important to the Cayman Islands and the Red Bay constituency. When the Chamber was established in 1965, the goal was to create an organization that supports, promotes, and protects the interests and welfare of its members and the wider community. Being nonpartisan, we have hosted forums every election year since the 1988 election. So for 9 elections, we have provided members of the community with an opportunity to hear from their candidates and educate themselves before Election Day. These forums have taken weeks of planning and preparation, with all the credit going to the hard-working Chamber staff, and would not have been possible without the financial support of our sponsors, Foster's, Affinity, Bodden's Legal and Corporate, and DART. So a very big thank you to them. I would also like to extend a wholehearted thanks to our media partners, Cayman Mile Road, Cayman Life TV, Radio Cayman, Government Information Services, and ICCIFM for agreeing to broadcast tonight's forum. It is the first time that we have live streamed the forums on the internet, and we hope that this new format will enable even more people to watch them in the comfort of your home. It is now time to begin this evening's forum, and I will therefore turn the proceedings over to Will Pinault, CEO of the Chamber, who will serve as this evening's moderator. He will explain the rules of the forum and introduce the Red Bay candidates.
Good evening, candidates.
Evening.
Rules for tonight's forum are as follows. Each candidate will be asked a series of questions. You'll have 2 minutes to respond to if you choose to do so. Each candidate will be allowed to answer the question without interruption and is free to differ with an opinion or position of another candidate during your allotted response time. Candidates are asked to deal solely with the issues, and at the conclusion of the forum, each candidate will be allowed a 2.5 minute of closing remarks. I'll now introduce the Red Bay candidates. We'll begin with Mr. Samuel Jackson. Mr. Jackson is a Caymanian and an experienced attorney at law with 27 years of law practice in the Cayman Islands and has experience in working in the civil service, the judicial department, and over 2 decades of private practice. In 1994, shortly after being called to the Cayman Bar, Mr. Jackson took up the post of Crown Counsel in the then legal department, where he undertook a wide array of work. During the latter part of his 4.5 years at the legal department, Mr. Jackson was seconded to the Ministry of Planning to work as counsel. Mr. Jackson left the legal department in mid-1998 to form a local law firm with 2 other Caymanian partners. That firm was dissolved by agreement in September 2004, and Mr. Jackson has worked in his own firm, now styled as Jackson Law, ever since. He has spent many years offering his assistance to legislative initiatives and has been appointed to and served on the board of a number of statutory authorities. Mr. Jackson is also a founding member of the Association of Legal Practitioners and Advocates, ALPA, which was created in early 2019 to represent and protect the interests of Caymanian sole practitioners and small Caymanian legal firms. Mr. Jackson has been, from inception, a member of the Executive Council of ALPA and is now serving as president. Welcome. Mr. Alden McLaughlin has been a member of the Legislative Assembly since 2000. He served as the Minister of Education, Training, Employment, Youth, Sports and Culture from 2005 to 2009. He has served as Premier since May 2013. In February 2011, he became political leader of the Progressives, of which he is a founding member. He was subsequently sworn in as Leader of the Opposition in the Legislative Assembly of the Cayman Islands. He spearheaded the new Cayman Islands Constitution, which was approved in the country's first referendum in May 2009. For his contribution to constitutional development in the Cayman Islands, he was awarded the MBE in the Queen's Birthday Honors in 2010. Following the 2013 elections, Mr. McLaughlin became Premier for the first time. He is the first Premier to serve consecutive terms in the Cayman Islands, with his re-election in May 2017. He also serves as Minister for Employment, Border Control, Community Affairs, International Trade, Investment, Aviation, and Maritime Affairs. Mr. McLaughlin is a lawyer and a former partner in a local law firm. He retired from the firm in 2005, following his re-election and his first appointment as a cabinet minister. He is a past president of the Caymanian Bar Association and the Lions Club of Grand Cayman. He is an avid reader, cyclist, and farmer. Mr. McLaughlin is married and has 2 sons. So at this time, we're going to take a short break, and when we come back, Mr. Gibbs and Mr. Scott will begin the questioning of our candidates. Please stay tuned.
Feed the family for less with Foster's Pick 5.
Choose from a range of meats including chicken thighs, pork chops, ground meats, beef stir-fry, sirloin steaks, and more, and only pay $19.99 for any 5-packs.
The meat is always fresh and never previously frozen. It's the perfect way to stock up for the week. That's dinner sorted.
Look out for Pick 5 in the meat department at all Foster's supermarket locations.
Foster's, better value because we care.
March in Cayman is hot, but at Foster's, it's frozen.
Frozen Food Month is back, and we're giving away 4 $250 Foster's cards. To enter, just purchase any 3 products from the frozen department from now until March 27th. It's that easy.
You could grab a frozen pizza for dinner, frozen berries for a morning smoothie, and frozen plant-based sausages for something different.
Exactly. Just don't forget to enter online at fosters.ky/frozen food month. Foster's, better because we care.
Welcome back to the Chamber of Commerce Candidates Forum for Red Bay. Panelist President Mike Gibbs and President-elect Shamari Scott will now present tonight's series of questions to the candidates.
Thank you, Will, and good evening once again, candidates. The first question I will address to Mr. Jackson, and it's relating to qualifications. And so what qualities and skills do you possess that make you the best candidate to represent the people of Red Bay?
Well, as a qualified lawyer with a specialty in planning and land law, I believe I have the skill set to address a number of the salient issues in Red Bay. I also pride myself on being solutions-oriented. I like to solve problems. I tend to engage with people. That is part of my repertoire. I like to help folks with their issues. And I believe that I can bring to Red Bay a new style of representation where I engage with the community directly, hear what they have to say, listen carefully to their issues, and try to solve them as best I can through the relevant legislative initiatives and policy directives if I am elected by the constituents of Red Bay. In terms of skills, I'm not just, my skill set isn't confined just to planning and that sort of thing, but also I have a very good grasp of things technical and mechanical. And I note that some of the things that Red Bay, one of the things that Red Bay residents are concerned with is traffic and also flooding. There are a number of ways I believe that these things can be easily addressed with the right technical assistance and a commitment from the relevant government agencies. So I look forward to doing my best to assist the residents of Red Bay if they select me to represent them.
Thank you. Mr. McLaughlin, same question.
I have been first I want to say good evening to everyone and thank the Chamber of Commerce for hosting this set of questions. This is the 6th of these I've engaged in the last 20 years, so it's truly a feature of the election process, and I'm sure the whole community is grateful to you, as I know I am, for doing so. I have been an elected representative for more than 20 years now. I represented Georgetown, the entire Georgetown, for 16 years until we went to single-member constituencies, and I had the fortune of being elected as a representative for Red Bay at the last election. As you have said, I've served as a minister for 1 term and 2 terms as premier. I understand the issues, not just in Red Bay, but across this country in a way that only experience can possibly allow you to. I have lived in the Red Bay and Prospect community for 29 years. I started my house there 33 years ago. I know almost every individual in the constituency of Red Bay. If I don't know every individual, I certainly know almost every family that is there. I have engaged consistently, despite the demands of the role of premier, with my constituents throughout my term there. I am on every single chat group that the constituency has, the Prospect and Red Bay Community Group, which has 2 chats, the Red Bay Community Chat, the Admiral's Landing Chat, the Patrick's Island Chat, the Red Bay District Committee, which is the committee of 15 that support me. And I engage regularly. Every day I give at least a couple of hours to engaging with my constituents in Red Bay on whatever the issues may be. I understand intimately the key issues that are challenging that district, that constituency, and over the course of this term, we have worked consistently to address them. And should I have the honor of being elected again, we intend to pursue them. They relate primarily to dealing with issues involving crime. We've instituted community policing, and over the course of the next term, I hope that we can move into more neighborhood watch system. We have addressed issues involving drainage by putting in new drain wells. We have paved dozens of the roads there, and the paving program is still very much underway.
Thank you.
I could go on, but I'll catch up on some of the other points later on in the discussion.
Thank you.
Honorable Premier, we'll start this round with question 2 that has to do with national issues with you. Aside from the response to the pandemic and the reopening of our borders to tourism, what do you consider to be the top national issue that you'll seek to address with the new government, and why?
Well, I'm afraid you've just hit on the 2 key issues, because unless we are absolutely spot on in how we deal with those, none of the other issues are going to be possible. The continued rollout of the vaccination program is absolutely key to us being able to do anything else. And so while I'm hopeful that on the present trajectory, in another few weeks, we might get close to the overall numbers that we are hoping for in terms of the broad population, I suspect that it will take us into May or June before we have 75 to 80% of the population here vaccinated, which will then allow us to reopen our borders relatively safely. And following that is an incredible amount of work, much of which is already on the way. We'll have to continue to be able to start to attract leisure tourism back to these islands. The economy is doing relatively well, but those who are involved in the tourism industry are still very much in trouble. The hotels, the condominiums, the people who work there are all still struggling. And so that is absolutely key. Beyond that, obviously issues involving infrastructure, the continued build out of the road system, addressing the traffic congestion issues that are there remains another key national priority. Issues involving the environment and around climate change and the impacts that is expected to have are also key issues that I believe all of us in government are going to have to continue to address. One which I think falls off most people's radar,
Thank you.
Young people.
Thank you.
Sorry, I wasn't watching the clock.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. Mr. Jackson.
You ready?
Yeah.
I think everyone is agreed, certainly most candidates and most of the people I've spoken to in the Red Bay area, that the top national issue is the cost of living. No, we haven't really seen much being addressed in that regard, being addressed by the government. That is the recurring complaint that I've heard, and that is at the tip of everyone's tongue. And I know there's no easy fix. There's no one panacea. There's lots of talk about minimum wage raise and that sort of thing. But I think that is certainly that is the top national issue that needs to be addressed by the new government, whoever that may be. And that needs to be vigorously addressed because there are folks who have fallen through the cracks. And it is, the government deserves commendation for what it has done with regards to the control of the spread of COVID-19, no doubt. But we do need to address that very salient, troubling issue because, whilst COVID may kill you, starvation will. There's a lot of folks who literally are desperate for help. Complaints are being made about NAU not being addressing their concerns in a timely manner and that sort of thing. And it's high time we caught those Caymanians who are falling through the cracks and address this issue of cost of living head on, in my humble view.
Thank you very much, Mr. Jackson.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next question, starting with Mr. Jackson to respond, focuses more onto Red Bay issues. And if elected, what 2 or 3 projects or programs would you like to accomplish for the people of Red Bay?
Well, one is addressing the traffic issue for not just the Red Bay area, but the adjoining Prospect area as well, because both areas are co-joined, divided simply by an arbitrary line. And when you look at a map, you can see that the east-west arterial road is simply a bypass, was constructed in the manner of a bypass highway. And those areas which comprise, I'm told, some 4,000 residents, are simply connected by 2 feeder roads from the old road onto the new roundabouts that are constructed as part of the east-west arterial. So traffic is a major thing that needs to be addressed. Another thing that I have had a lot of feedback on is crime. And I think that it would be certainly useful to look into the possibility of putting a small outpost police station in the area so that you could have rapid response time. I know there's a community policeman who is assigned to that area, but with 4,000 residents, I don't think that is adequate. So those are some of the things that I think that need to be addressed, along with There's in Selkirk, areas of Selkirk Drive, for example, massive flooding issues. I spoke to a lady the other day who said she had over a foot of water standing in her yard every time it rains. There must be some simple, perhaps expensive, but simple civil works that can be done to relieve that flooding, and those things need to be addressed.
Thank you. Mr. McLaughlin, same question, please.
If I can pick up on the traffic issue, there is a comprehensive road expansion plan, which we have publicized more than once. Red Bay is the narrowest point of the island. It is 1 mile from the South Sound to the North Sound. And therefore, it is very built up, so it makes expansion extremely challenging. But we have come up with a plan which we have been working on now for about 4 years. Obviously, the COVID crisis caused some significant delay in that, but the work is now very much on the way to create 6 lanes all the way down into the Linford Pearson Highway and onto Bobby Thompson Way. We expect that the whole of that job will be completed before the end of this year, but the key bits down to Grand Harbor should be completed in another month to 6 weeks, which are going to make a huge difference. But one of the important things that I know the residents of Red Bay will be happy to learn is that we have today reached agreement with respect to local access from Selkirk Drive into the Grand Harbor and Davenport development. And along with that, the plan is for the creation of local access all the way from Grand Harbor roundabout through to Admiral's Landing to avoid motorists and residents in that area having to deal with what will become a 6-lane highway. So that is a major project which is on the way, which I see us having to take through right into the next term. Issues in one of the benefits of that is we've also reached agreement to use the swale or ditch, as some may call it, which exists there between the Davenport development and Selkirk Drive. It's been there for years and years, so that we can use that to assist with drainage and to solve some of those issues, particularly as they affect Red Bay states.
Thank you, sir.
Mr. McLaughlin, we're going to start the fourth question with yourself. A topical issue in education and governance of education. Would you ever support a radical change in the structure of the governance of the education system in Cayman? For example, issuing government vouchers to attend private schools, establishing academies or charter schools, devolving ministerial powers to create an independent school board to oversee the local school system, etc., or should we continue with the current structure?
I would never say never to any of those things, but I have a great deal of confidence in the structure which is now being rolled out, which will effectively. There's a pilot project that is about to begin with one of the schools, creating separate governing bodies for each school. So there is direct accountability from the performance of the school to a governing body, rather than the way the system currently is now, where you have the minister on top, then you have the chief officer, then you have the head of the Department of Education, before you get down to the principal of the school. The schools don't have boards. They have PTAs, but they don't have boards. So this is a structure that has been well researched and well thought out. And I know the current Minister of Education, Honorable Juliana O'Connor, is very keen, as are many other private sector folk, in seeing how this system works, because it's going to make accountability right up close, not up to the minister that most of the people wouldn't even know. But there will be a local governing body, a local board, which the principal and the school has to account. So I believe that has a lot of promise. And if we are re-elected as a government, that program, that project will continue to roll out over the course of the next few years.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. Mr. Jackson?
I believe a radical change is needed to the legislative framework, i.e. the education law, in that if you look at that law, there's a tripartite structure to the management of the education system, in that you have the minister that has wide-ranging powers, and there's a council that serves as an advisory board primarily, but a number of functions of the minister have been delegated and can be delegated to that entity. And then you have the department headed by the chief officer. I believe that structure, which is more along the lines of an old style of doing business, so to speak, is outdated and promotes dysfunction. And I think what is needed is a proper functioning regulatory structure along the lines of that that is dictated by the Public Authorities Law, where you have a regulator of governance boards, etc. And that entity would then you can enter into an arrangement as with other statutory authorities to the ministry, and the minister simply serves to create policy and promulgate legislation to manage that entity. And that way you have one body that serves as the umbrella to all of the education functions in the country. And that then would be the regulator of education, which could then focus on what is needed from the various boards of various schools, etc. I think that is a much better model. It's much more efficient, and it's more along the lines of a modern structure, regulatory structure.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson.
Our fifth question we'll be addressing to Mr. Jackson first, in connection with employment and the Ministry of Work, the Department of Work. So with regard to the new Department of Work system that has been implemented in recent years, do you consider the system a success? And if not, what improvements would you recommend?
I don't think by any far stretch of the imagination anyone should describe the work system as a success. Last I saw, they had themselves internal work-related issues, but there are good people in there. I think the system needs to be revamped. This isn't my area especially, but I can tell you from what I've seen and what I've heard and what I've read that there are improvements, and what I can tell you is that the problems have manifested themselves in terms of various complaints from various sectors about disenfranchisement of Caymanians that should have jobs that aren't getting access to those jobs. There seems to be some breakdown in communication, or there's a lack of data retention. I don't know what exactly the problem is, but it seems that the work system simply isn't working to put Caymanians in a preferential position. I think when we moved away from this whole notion of protecting Caymanian interests and changing the immigration structure, we stepped off the path to a better future for Caymanians. And I would like to see that system revamped.
Thank you. Mr. McLaughlin, same question, please.
So work is the result of changes made to legislation which separated immigration control from employment issues. Mm-hmm. That's the overall objective of the exercise. And so we created a separate entity, a separate department to deal with employment issues. The objective of work is to ensure that every job that is available in Cayman is known, and the opportunity is there for anyone who's interested in a job to see what job offers there are. And therefore, for the people who are granting or dealing with applications for work permits to be able to know who has applied and what their qualifications are. Generally, the system, I think, is working reasonably well. There are over 1,000 jobs on there now. There are some operational issues that they're encountering with the various computer programs that set this up, which are creating some real frustration on the part of both employers and employees. And those issues have to be worked through. We have to own those and we have to work through them. But conceptually, I think it is the best system that we have ever thought up in terms of being able to have full transparency on what jobs are available and who's applying for them, so that proper assessment can be made as to whether or not a work permit should be granted or not in the particular case.
I'd like to thank the candidates. We've gone through the first 5 questions, so please stay tuned. We'll have a short commercial break, and we'll return with the next round of 5 questions. Please stay tuned.
At Bay Market Cafe, we know life can get in the way of good food, so we're here to offer a hand. Online ordering is back, and this time, it's better than ever. If you overslept and are running out of time, order online and pick it up. Raining? Get it delivered. On your way to go there or do that, order and pick it up. Sun scorching? Meeting? Get it delivered. That way, you can spend more time doing this or that with him, her, they, and them. So whether you need your morning coffee, you're craving a red velvet donut, ramen, a lamb burger, or a falafel pita, order the food you love and skip the line. Pick it up or have it delivered. That's Bay Market Online.
Feed the family for less with Foster's Pick 5.
Choose from a range of meats including chicken thighs, pork chops, ground meats, beef stir-fry, sirloin steaks, and more, and only pay $19.99 for any 5-packs.
The meat is always fresh and never previously frozen. It's the perfect way to stock up for the week. That's dinner sorted.
Look out for Pick 5 in the meat department at all Foster's supermarket locations.
Foster's, better value because we care.
You hear people talk about the economy all the time. But what is the economy exactly? The economy is the flow of money between the people, the companies, and the government in the Cayman Islands. Why is it important to understand the economy? Well, just like the engine of a car, the better we understand the economy, the better we can make it run, and the more prosperous we can become as a community. The first important thing to understand about the economy is that the private sector is the main source of all wealth. Think about it. Most people work for companies in the private sector, both big companies and small businesses. But even if you work for the government, your salary comes from the fees and duties paid to the government by private sector companies and their employees. That's why we call the private sector the prosperity engine that powers our economy and drives the country forward. When business is booming, companies have more money to spend on salaries, bonuses, and promotions. Employees with more money buy more products and services from other businesses. All those people and businesses spending money generates revenue for the government, which pays for important services like education, roads, emergency services, and care for the elderly. So when the private sector is doing well, everyone does well. But when the private sector isn't doing well, like during a recession, the money dries up and everyone suffers. So when you hear people ask, how do we make our country more prosperous? The answer is pretty simple. Grow the economy. After all, you can't get more money from a system that isn't making more money. That's not economics. That's just common sense. In this video series, we're going to take a closer look at our economy to see how we can fuel our prosperity engine and how to make sure everyone benefits. For now, thanks for watching, and remember to share this video with your family and friends so they can learn more about our economic prosperity engine.
Welcome back to the Chamber of Commerce Candidates Forum for Red Bay. I now turn it back over to President-elect Shamari Scott for the next round of 5 questions.
Thank you, Will. Mr. McLaughlin, we'll start this round with you again. It has to do with road improvements, and I know we started to touch on that with the Red Bay issues, but now you have a further 2 minutes to expound. What road changes, if any, would you propose to improve traffic conditions for Red Bay residents?
Well, thank you very much for that question and opportunity to speak a little more about that. As I said, we have rolled out a national road improvement program, which is stretched over the course of this term and will stretch well into the next. As far as the eastern districts are concerned and the bottleneck that is created there at Red Bay, the extension to the east-west arterial is currently on the way. We hope to take that all the way through to Woodland Drive over the course of the next couple of months. And then beyond that, we have to do an EIA, so we'll have to pause to get that aspect of it done, but we can finish that and provide access onto the extended bit for people in that area. So there'll be a flow through there. And coupled with the expansion from the Red Bay School, if I call it the Red Bay School roundabout, down to Grand Harbor, that'll be expanded to 6 lanes as well. And then the extension of the Bobby Thompson Way, the Linford Pearson Way, and then down to Bobby Thompson Way. We have reached agreement with Mr. Bobby Thompson so that we are not going to have to battle over the issues with the horse stables there anymore. We've acquired, or in the process of acquiring, the land from Mr. Bobby Thompson to the south. So there's going to be a general significant expansion of roadways, and which should provide fairly early relief to those people who have to traverse it. Because not just the people in Red Bay, it's the people from the eastern districts as well. But we are all deeply conscious that no matter how many roads we build, the roads are simply going to get filled up with cars as the country continues to develop, unless we find other ways of moving people up and down, unless we are able to persuade the business community that everybody doesn't have to be at work at 8 o'clock or 8:30 in the morning. I think the experiences with COVID-19 has taught us that it is possible to operate without having everybody in the office at the same time. Have some more, but no more time.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. Mr. Jackson, over to you.
Well, it's encouraging to hear that there are going to be road changes that improve traffic conditions for Red Bay residents, but based on what I've heard and what I've seen, it seems more that relief will come to the eastern districts, which is good, in that it will improve traffic flow through the east-west arterial bypass road. But I don't know if that will address the problems that the Red Bay and Prospect communities experience, again, in that they need to connect into these roundabouts that are part of the east-west bypass, because it was designed as a bypass. I think that there needs to be a overarching approach looking at how these things connect. I don't know that the NRA has taken the right approach with that, but I agree with the Premier that we need to find alternate solutions for traffic problems. I do agree with that. And that one of the things that I would have thought should have been implemented by now was a properly structured public transport system comprised of perhaps large buses that run on a timely schedule, etc. We've been talking about that for over 20 years. It has never happened. I think the traffic problems need to be addressed holistically, but in terms of what helps Red Bay and Prospect residents, I think there needs to be better connectivity from those to those districts. I am encouraged to hear there is going to be some internal road works connecting those. I believe that's part of a larger development. And when I hear that an EIA might have to be commissioned, I think it's a little bit presumptuous to say that there's going to be relief soon, because the EIA may very well recommend that the road does not. It's an environmental impact assessment after all. If it says that the road shouldn't be built, then how does that give us any assurance that the road will be built? Thank you. Those are my concerns.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson.
Staying with you, Mr. Jackson, the next question focuses on the reopening of our borders. And wondering, what's your view on reopening the borders to overnight visitors now that the percentage of persons being vaccinated continues to increase?
Well, I think that we have to depend on the advice of the medical experts as to what that threshold is, that we're at a safe level before we open our borders. I don't think there's any magical date we should set, should target until we know what that we have achieved that threshold. Certainly, overnight visitors. If by that I interpret that as stayover visitors, that is probably where we should be looking generally in terms of quality over quantity for tourism generally, since after all the cruise tourism is what brought COVID to our shores, and is obviously a higher risk. That I would say we should start with overnight with the stayover visitors. But that shouldn't start until we have been given a green light by all of the relevant medical experts.
Thank you. Mr. McLaughlin, you touched on it in your earlier comments, but maybe if you could expand on that, please.
Well, we've worked too hard and sacrificed too much as a country and as a community for us to risk community spread of the disease. So any decisions we make have to bear, as it has always done, in the minds of the government, we have to bear that in the forefront of our minds as the most critical, important issue. Italy today went back into lockdown for the third time, and that is what happens when you don't do the job properly and when you allow economic imperatives to override common sense and the science and the public health guidance. So we are just over 35,000 vaccinations in our people's arms so far. We've hit about 92% of those people who are over 60, but we're still less than 30% of the overall population over the age of 60. So our goal is between 75 and 80% of the local population vaccinated, both doses having been received. Once we reach there, we will be able to open safely because it'll be next to impossible for community spread of the disease. Because if you didn't take it for one reason or another and you get it, and you get the disease, your ability to transmit it, or even if you transmit it, to make other people really sick is significantly reduced. We effectively get the herd immunity that you've heard spoken about. So we will continue to be guided as long as we're in office by that. And as I said earlier, I am still very hopeful that by May, June, on the present trajectory, we'll get there. What we have to do is to collectively encourage younger people who many feel that they're not going to get sick if they get it anyhow, to go and take the vaccine so we can get those numbers. And we can possibly become the first country in the world that can really reopen safely.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Oh, I've already, sorry, my apologies.
No problem. Mr. McLaughlin, we'll start this round 8 with you again. It has to do with financial services. The European Union is planning to place all countries that do not have a direct tax system on a permanent blacklist. Do you support continuing the practice of complying with the wishes of the EU, even if it makes our jurisdiction uncompetitive?
Well, anything that makes our jurisdiction uncompetitive is something that we have to abandon immediately. But I don't believe it is that we are, that it's those two extremes that we are talking about. I have spent a lot of time over the course of the last probably 10 years dealing with these issues in Cayman, in Brussels, in Washington, in London, in Paris, in Berlin. And there is no doubt in any of our minds that there is a hard group of countries, very powerful countries too, France, Spain, Germany in particular, who are determined to put places like the Cayman Islands out of the financial services business. But that, I don't think, is the overall view of all members of the European Union. Our challenge, many people say, why do you even bother? Because we do so little business directly with Europe. The issue is that many of the big companies that have Cayman as a base or do business in Cayman require very clean records with respect to the countries with which they deal, and for them to have to put into their financial reports that they are established in or doing business in a country that is on a blacklist anywhere, but particularly a European community blacklist, creates major issues for them. It also, being blacklisted also threatens our ability to move money in and out of these islands. And those things can very quickly put a damper on the broader financial services business that we do. So our view and the view of the industry generally is we have to continue to negotiate, to use diplomatic skills and abilities to do as we have done thus far. I mean, we've been dealing with the challenge from the mid-90s. This was what initially propelled me into politics in 2000. So this is not going to go away. We just have to continue to manage the situation.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. Mr. Jackson?
Well, I don't know if the European Union is planning to place all countries that, in particular Cayman, on a permanent blacklist. I've not seen that written anywhere. There certainly is that school of thought prevailing here in certain quarters. I've had a number of conversations with folks who seem to think that where we're lacking is in our ability to promote the jurisdiction as a clean, compliant jurisdiction. But there's no doubt that what placed us on the EU blacklist the last time in February 2020 was the government's tardiness in passing legislation that it had promised it would pass in a timely manner. The same thing occurred again recently with regards to the FATF grey list. We have to be, I believe, a little more proactive. I know we've passed lots of legislation, jumped through lots of hoops, but there is certainly, from many of the folks that I've spoken to in the financial services industry, this prevailing view that the government simply did not move fast enough. And that was why we ended up on the blacklist in February last year and the grey list this year. And if that is if that is true, we need to deploy whatever resources are necessary to make sure that never happens again. And to work diligently to continue to promote. I don't think we can afford, I agree with the Premier, I don't think we can afford to write off the business from the EU. I don't think it's that simple at all. Although I know there are folks who think that. We have to be very careful. The folks in the financial services industry has done a lot. This has been a hard-earned. We have earned our reputation and our business the hard way against giants in terms of the size of the jurisdictions like France and Germany, etc. So we need to do what we can to protect that.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Continuing with yourself on moving into the area of the environment. As a result of climate change, the Cayman Islands are threatened by rising sea levels and stronger hurricanes. What measures would you recommend to protect our terrestrial and marine environments? Well,
I think it's more to it than rising sea levels and stronger hurricanes. I think the marine and terrestrial environments are under threat from a number of factors, and one of them is overdevelopment. Certainly, our terrestrial environments could be protected by way of once we identify truly sensitive, environmentally sensitive areas by national park style legislation. I am all for identifying those areas that need environmental protection terrestrially and legislating to protect them. If that involves privately owned land, we need to acquire it so that we don't, because folks who own land in Cayman have a guaranteed title and they have rights vis-a-vis the Constitution. So that is what I do with the terrestrial sensitive environments. The marine environments, there's a number of things that can be done and need to be done very quickly to protect our reefs and our reef fish. I've had a number of conversations recently with folks like Courtney Platt, who is a very powerful advocate, and he has convinced me that unless we do something very urgently. We could have entire species of grouper and parrotfish become extinct in Cayman. That's simply unacceptable. Our reefs are too precious a resource in terms of our dive tourism product. We need to do everything we can to make sure they are protected.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson. Mr. McLaughlin.
Thank you very much. Small islands, small territories like the Cayman Islands are really, in fact, the victims of climate change rather than the causes or contributors to it. But it is something that we have to accept and build resilience for. Not very much that we do here is going to contribute to or change or prevent climate change. So we've got to be smarter in the way that we build. We've got to build more resilient buildings. We've got to build further away from the sea rather than closer to it. Mr. Jackson is known as the developer's lawyer. He's argued many cases for why you should build closer to the beach.
That is not true.
I know when I was a lawyer, I had to argue those cases too, because developers want to make as much as they can from a particular development. But we've got to build more resiliently than is currently the case. And a lot of decisions, or bad decisions, were taken a long time ago. In my view, I've said this from time I was a very young man, we ought never to have allowed development along 7 Mile Beach itself. It should have been across the road from it. But those decisions were taken long before we had the opportunity to have any say in that. But we are making great strides. Today there was an announcement that a decision which Cabinet took back in 2019 to expand the marine parks from 14% of the protected area, of 14% of protected area to 48%, was the regulations were finally gazetted. Today, people will scratch their head and wonder why. Well, COVID-19 had something to do with it, but general government bureaucracy in getting these things written and promulgated is largely the reason for it. Certainly no lack of determination on the part of the government, who actually approved that some 2 years ago.
Thank you.
Mr. McLaughlin, we'll start with you. This one has to do with housing. Housing and land prices continue to increase as developers build high-end apartments and developments that most lower to middle income Caymanians are unable to afford. What is your view on this situation, and how do you propose to address it?
It is a critical issue for the country. We have done a number of things. Previous governments have as well to assist Caymanians in being able to get a piece of the rock, as we say. And in addition to that, there is the work that is done by the National Housing Development Trust in building homes which many Caymanians can afford. The challenge is the National Housing Development Trust is so far not been capable of producing enough of them quickly enough, and the demand is well exceeds the supply. So we've got to do a lot on that particular front. But some key changes that we made during the course of this term were any Caymanian first-time home purchaser who purchases a house for $400,000 pays absolutely no stamp duty at all. So that's a saving of about 30%. And we went further recently in saying that if you buy a house that is $500,000 or $600,000, you don't pay stamp duty on the first $400,000 as well, to try to give Caymanians a leg up. But we had come back. But people who can buy $400,000 and $500,000 houses are in a different league. Yes, we might need some assistance, but the more critical issue are people who can't buy a $400,000 house and who need a house for $150,000 or $180,000. And we've been coming up with ways of doing that to provide incentives to contractors, developers, to get them to go into this particular market, because we acknowledge that the National Housing Development Trust is not going to be able to keep pace with demand. So we've got to find ways to incentivize developers to build for that lower end of the market. And of course, all of those houses, there would be no stamp duty on those as well. So in the $150,000, $180,000, maybe even $200,000 range is where we need to go. And we believe, and we're quite well down the road with the plan, that we can provide the kind of incentives that are necessary to get developers to see this as something that's worth their while.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. Mr. Jackson?
Well, that all sounds fine and well, but the reality of the matter is that the cost of construction and the cost of land have become astronomical recently. We are hearing that the average cost of a house in Cayman is now $800,000. That is not to say you can't build cheaper than that, but I think it is a pipe dream to assume that you can build a house that is hurricane resilient for $100,000 to $200,000, unless it's a very, very small one. We have seen the tremendous demand for land in Cayman as a result of land banking from folks from other jurisdictions who can raise money very cheaply, investing it here, and that is unfair competition for Caymanians to buy land of their own and to build. I have a client who told me recently that he has a friend who's building a house that is costing him $1,000 per square foot. That is where we're going in terms of cost of construction in Cayman. There's a number of factors that are driving that. We need to figure out how it is we are going to find sufficient land and allow Caymanians to build in a way that we can actually afford these things. Perhaps one of the ways that could be done is to, instead of granting massive concessions to large developments built by billionaires and millionaires, the government could see fit to grant concessions to small Caymanian developers who are marketing directly to Cayman buyers. That would be a suggestion I would put forward. Certainly something that any government that I am involved with would have to consider, because I would advocate for that. We simply need to find a way to make sure that Caymanians aren't left behind, and that is exactly what is happening here.
Well, thank the candidates. We've gone through 10 questions. We're going to take another break. Please stay with us. We have next round of 5 questions right after this break.
March in Cayman is hot, but at Foster's, it's frozen.
Frozen Food Month is back, and we're giving away 4 $250 Foster's cards. To enter, just purchase any 3 products from the frozen department from now until March 27th. It's that easy.
You could grab a frozen pizza for dinner, frozen berries for a morning smoothie, and frozen plant-based sausages for something different.
Exactly. Just don't forget to enter online at fosters.ky/frozen food month. Foster's, better because we care.
Here in the Cayman Islands, the private sector is the prosperity engine that drives the country forward. Just like a real engine. The better we understand how it works, the better we can make it run, and the better off we'll be. To help illustrate how our economy works, let's take a step back in time to when there were only a few thousand people living in Cayman. In those days, most people survived by fishing or farming for food. It was a simple, wholesome life, but it was a lot of hard work. Most people bought what they needed from their neighbors. As people bought and sold things, their individual wealth went up or down, but the overall wealth of the country stayed the same. In a simple economy like this, the only way one person could increase their wealth was by reducing someone else's. In order to increase the overall wealth of the country, one of our Caymanian ancestors would have to sell something, a product or service, to someone somewhere else, and bring that money back home. In other words, we would have to export something. In those days, our biggest export was labor. Men worked overseas or on the seas and brought the money home, thereby increasing the total wealth of the country. Although the economy is much bigger and more complex today, these same principles still apply. Every time a company in Cayman sells a product or service to a customer overseas, the overall wealth of the country increases. Once it's here, it flows around the local economy between the government, the people, and the companies, and becomes a part of our society's wealth. The 2 biggest sources of income for our economy today are financial services and tourism, often called the pillars of our economy. Tourists come here and spend their money. So all of the tourism companies like hotels, restaurants, buses, Stingray City Tours that make sure our visitors have a great time are helping to increase the wealth of our country. Just like tourists, clients of financial services firms come here and spend money too. So all of our financial service companies like insurance companies, fund administrators, lawyers, and accountants that facilitate investment transactions for people and companies around the world bring money into the economy and increase the overall wealth. The point is, if we want to increase the prosperity of our country, the best way to do that, in fact, the only way to do that, is to grow the private sector. In particular, the companies at the front lines that bring the wealth here from overseas in the first place. In the next video, we'll talk a little about how money moves around the economy. For now, thanks for watching, and remember to share this video with your family and friends so they can learn more about our economic prosperity engine. In the last episode, we learned about the important role of companies here in Cayman that do business with overseas customers and generate new wealth for the Cayman Islands economy. But what about all the other companies in the Cayman Islands? How do they fit into our prosperity engine? Every business in the Cayman Islands falls into one of three groups, or tiers. Each tier plays a critical role in our economy. The first tier is made up of all the companies that do business with overseas customers and bring money into our economy. Companies in this tier are like the gas tank of our economic prosperity engine. The more we have in the tank, the farther we can go. Although most well-known companies in this tier are in financial services like Butterfield Bank or tourism like the Ritz-Carlton, there are many other well-known Tier 1 companies doing business with overseas customers like Uniregistry, Health City, and all of the companies in Cayman Enterprise City. The second tier of the economy is all the companies that do business with other local companies, like IT and marketing consultants, or companies that sell supplies to bars and restaurants. These companies are also very important because without them, the companies they supply would need to buy their goods and services from overseas. So while companies in Tier 1 bring money into our economy, companies in Tier 2 help keep it here. The third tier is made up of all the companies that provide services to people that live and work in the Cayman Islands. Companies in this tier include supermarkets, dry cleaners, mechanics, gyms, doctors, dentists, architects, house builders, florists, and gardeners. These companies are important sources of employment and business opportunities for our people. And they play a really important role because without them, Cayman wouldn't be a very nice place to live. So to recap, Tier 1 companies do business with customers overseas. Tier 2 companies do business with other companies in Cayman. And Tier 3 companies do business with those who live here. Every company and self-employed contractor in the Cayman Islands falls into one of these three tiers. And they all play an important role in making our nation prosperous, helping bring money into our country, improve our economy, and creating jobs. And without them, the Cayman Islands wouldn't be the great country that it is. Thanks for watching. And remember to share this on social media so we can all help fuel the economic prosperity engine.
At Bay Market Cafe, we know life can get in the way of good food, so we're here to offer a hand. Online ordering is back, and this time, it's better than ever. If you overslept and are running out of time, order online and pick it up. Raining? Get it delivered. On your way to go there or do that, order and pick it up. Sun scorching? Meeting? Get it delivered. That way, you can spend more time doing this or that with him, her, they, and them. So whether you need your morning coffee, you're craving a red velvet donut, ramen, a lamb burger, or a falafel pita, order the food you love and skip the line. Pick it up or have it delivered. That's Bay Market Online.
Welcome back to the Chamber of Commerce Candidates Forum for Red Bay. We now move into the next series of questions, and to pose the first question is President Mike Gibbs.
Thank you, Will. This question will be addressed to Mr. Jackson. Focusing on Red Bay, what is your vision for the future development of Red Bay?
Well, most of Red Bay, save for one large tract of land, has already been developed as low density residential, mostly single family and apartment developments. Any future development, I think, needs to be done in concert with the necessary infrastructural upgrades. There needs to be an evaluation of any impact on the environment, not just for the Red Bay area, but everywhere else. We've reached that sort of critical mass where we're at threshold or beyond it in terms of the carrying capacity of our infrastructure. We're not even in a situation where we have open borders, but we see cars stacked, bumper to bumper during rush hours into town and out of town. And we simply cannot afford to create a gridlock where, because everybody rushes to build and bring to market as many multifamily developments as they can. For example, right around the Grand Harbour area right now, there's at least 4 major developments, multifamily developments, which will be coming online sometime in the next, I would say, estimate 12 to 18 months. When they do, they are going to bring to the bottleneck area just to the west of Red Bay, several hundred cars per morning, several hundred cars per evening. And that is by itself going to create a serious stress on the infrastructure. So any development in the Red Bay area, such as the one that's being proposed right now, needs to be carefully considered by the CPA. It is my view that it is lamentable that in 2014, the previous government, led by the Premier, literally removed a provision from the Development and Planning Law, which was then Section 6, which put us at a huge disadvantage.
Thank you. Mr. McLaughlin.
Well, Red Bay is a great community. It is a residential community. There are still quite a bit of areas towards the back of the Red Bay Prospect area that have not yet been developed. It has restaurants, it has easy access to restaurants, to bars. It has the sailing club. It is a really nice, quiet residential area. But we have this, as I said before, it's the narrowest point of the island. And so we have this challenge in being able to get traffic which comes from the east into town and going back through there in a timely manner. I've already gone through broadly what the plans are with respect to improving that road situation, but I just want to focus briefly on the fact that part of this exercise that we are working on now is the creation of local access from Grand Harbour all the way through to Admiral Landing to create traffic calming measures and ease access and safer pedestrian and cycle provision for people who live in that particular area. Now, the overall, what we do further with respect to Red Bay, I hope will come into focus when the plan came on, and Georgetown is the next area once we've completed 7 Mile Beach, their area assessments and recommendations of the plan came on process, which is updating the development plan for the country generally. We expect that to be rolled out later in this year, and issues involving zoning and what density and traffic, managing traffic and so forth are all part of that process.
Thank you.
And I know that the people of Red Bay would want to be involved in that.
Thank you.
This next question has to do with economic diversification, and it's for you, Mr. McLaughlin. Financial services continues to come under external pressures, and tourism may never return to pre-pandemic levels. What are your views about diversifying the economy, and which areas would you support and encourage?
Well, I don't want us to ever dismiss financial services. It has proven again, for those who thought otherwise, that it is the key pillar in our economy. Not tourism. Tourism not even close when you look at the numbers. I think there's going to be a real rethink, certainly if the government that I wish to be part of is elected this time, a real rethink about cruise tourism and limiting the numbers, putting a ceiling on the numbers of cruise passengers that we want here at any given time. Because having taken the decision as we have, guided by what we believe is popular opinion, that we should not proceed with the construction of a cruise pier, there is no way that we have the carrying capacity without a cruise pier to manage the kind of numbers that we were starting to get to. So we're going to have to focus on, despite the challenges on financial services, year after year, no matter how many challenges we've had, we've continued to improve the numbers, the revenue, the occupation, the employment opportunities for our people in financial services. We're going to have to focus more on stay-over tourism, the leisure tourism, but I believe the most exciting bit of it is health tourism or wellness tourism. And we've seen what Health City has done. We see what Astor is proposing. And I think we in government currently are very excited at the prospects for this, because I hate to say it this way because it may sound insensitive, but people get sick in good times and in bad. So health tourism is a much more reliable source of continued revenue than is, say, leisure tourism, which is subject to how well people and the economies around the world are doing. And the other aspect of it, obviously, is the tech side of it. We see with Tech City and Tech Cayman, part of the Cayman Enterprise system, how well they are doing and the great opportunities they are continuing to offer increasingly to local people.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. Mr. Jackson.
Well, just following up on that final note, we are hopeful that there is some significant trickle down from these largely government-supported proposed projects. We hope that there aren't significant concession packages granted to them, so that we will actually derive some benefit from those future developments, because there's been far too many projects approved in the last 4 to 8 years where we don't really get even what we were statutorily promised in terms of the prescribed fees, etc. I know the government will say that it was because they needed to stimulate the economy, but I don't know why you would need to stimulate an already overactive economy in terms of the construction industry. We are now realizing that the construction industry is operating beyond capacity. And to answer the question, financial services is absolutely key. I agree 100%. What I find unfortunate is when the government passes legislation that allows a large number of the major firms to place its operatives beyond the borders of Cayman without deriving even the benefit of the work permit fees that we would normally get from that. So if we are going to continue down this path of promoting business that Cayman derives no real economic benefit from, we are going to have a problem even with that great pillar of the society that the Premier just spoke about. We need to make sure that whatever we do going forward, that there's real benefit for Caymanians, not just for a special interest group of Caymanians or a few folks in Georgetown who already make very large profits. This is Cayman, and it should be for Caymanians first.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson.
Mr. Jackson, this next question is addressed to you, and it's somewhat of a continuation, but more focusing on population growth and development. Is what are your views on the current pace of population growth and development?
But I think the development is fueling, the rapid pace of development, unbridled development is driving the population growth, and I think that is deliberate. There's been a number of initiatives proposed where some certain quarters are saying we need to grow the population to 100,000 because that's the critical mass where we achieve some magical economic benefit from that. I've never understood the rationale behind that. I think, this build it and they will come sort of mentality only benefits a few folks. And we've already seen what has happened as a result of land banking in Cayman and investment in real estate. We're not building for Caymanians anymore. We're not even deriving real benefit for Caymanians from the construction industry and the development industry, because we are handing over large financial grants in terms of concessions, etc. And we simply need to stop. We need to get a handle on development and curtail population growth, because we are already beyond capacity in terms of infrastructure. We know that there's going to be irreversible economic harm, environmental harm. There is already economic harm from the arrangements the government has made with a number of those large developments. And as I said earlier, the reason for this is that we removed, as a jurisdiction in 2014, removed a very important piece of legislation, which required the CPA to consider the infrastructural impacts and the environmental impacts for major developments, which were defined in that provision. That has gone for everything except planned area developments. And because of that, we have had a number of large developments now approved by the CPA as if they were ordinary sized developments. And that's unfortunate.
Thank you. Mr. McLaughlin.
I sit here and I listen to my colleague and I shake my head. It is amazing how history can be revised. When we took office in 2013, the economy was in the doldrums. Caymanian unemployment was at 10.5%. We had the Chamber of Commerce, we had CETA, we had the Contractors Association, we had every association involved with business hammering at us to do something to get the economy moving. We had the average person who was out of a job because the country had still not recovered from the 2008 financial meltdown. We had to do things. That's the reason why we gave concessions at the time, to spur development. We have given virtually no concessions during the course of the current term, and we've had some people mad at us for not granting them. But we said the reason why we granted concessions is because we wanted development to move. Development is moving. There's no need to grant concessions. The grant of concessions is an economic tool which governments all over the world use. And I think we've used it very wisely here. We are in a fortunate position now where we can actually turn away developments and developers. Let me turn to the population issue. So people are not, developers are not building places for because they believe the people are going to come. Developers are building places because there is demand for the space, for houses, for homes. Mr. Jackson himself noted how challenging it is for people to get homes, local people to get homes. That is why developers are building, because they believe that there is a demand for it. Now, we have to look at this thing holistically. We can't look at it just from one perspective. When the government says to people, you can't get any more work permits, you can't grow your business anymore, you'll hear a whole different cry, conscious at the time.
Thank you.
Mr. McLaughlin, this question has to do with youth matters. What do you regard as the two top issues facing our youth of today, and how do you intend to address these concerns if elected?
I think, and some may be surprised by the order in which I place these, I think issues around mental health and wellness is currently the most significant issue that most young people will tell you about. Dealing with the stresses and strains of ordinary life, going to school, and all the challenges that this very complex society brings to bear upon young people in a way that wasn't the case when I was a youngster. I think that is a very critical issue that we must continue to address. The government has taken some major strides which no government has previously taken in the development which is on the way for the mental health facility up in East End. But that is going to be mainly for for adults, we need to continue to focus more on programs and support for young people who are having challenges with mental health. And then I think the other really significant one is employment opportunities, making the transition from school, and not just high school, even from university, into the workforce in Cayman continues to be a major challenge for young people. Unfortunately, I hope, I don't know if anyone in the chamber by saying this, unfortunately, the business community is not as willing and forgiving as once it was. Willing, that is, to take on people who don't have the requisite experience and to help train them and mold them into the good employees that we know they can be. And I think a lot more effort has got to be done on both on government side and the private sector side in being able to usher young people into the workforce, them having gone through the educational system, and in many cases having had the tertiary education, whether it is university or technical and vocational training, which is increasingly available.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. Mr. Jackson?
I would agree that one of the two top issues facing our youth today is the failings of the education system. And it has failed, I believe, in a number of ways. I believe it's failed because it lacks the structure it needs to properly manage education. But speaking to educational experts recently, I was shocked to learn that their views were that where we're going wrong is we don't intervene early enough. We need more early child intervention by childhood intervention by professionals. We need more inclusion of challenged kids in the school, in regular schools. The education law actually provides for that, but it appears to not be enforced as regards private schools. So there are a number of issues surrounding education. As regards to public schools, it seems to be a general breakdown somehow in the quality of education that they're getting. We've heard a lot about that recently. But on the other side of things, the other issue facing the youth of today, if we're talking about youth going into early 20s, is those competent, qualified, intelligent Caymanians that get the opportunity to go and get a college education, return to Cayman, and for some reason they can't find access to the jobs that they ought to get access to. And that is why I said earlier that the work system, the immigration system generally is failing somehow. I don't know exactly what the cause is. I'm not in government, but I can promise you this. If I ever am, I'll make sure to investigate, to find out what it is, and do what I can to assist. Because that is really a sad state of affairs. If a young qualified Caymanian comes back from college, he or she ought to be able to find a suitable job in this country.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson.
Mr. Jackson, staying with you, question 15 focuses on constitutional reform. Would you support a constitutional provision which allows electors of a constituency to recall their elected member of parliament? Why or why not?
Yes, I would. I think every parliamentarian should fear that being fired if they're not doing the job properly. We have seen in recent times the failings of the current constitution in that we have had a situation which I don't want to provoke too much controversy over, which resulted in us calling an early election because of that debacle. We need to put the power in the people's hands. If the people elect us, then in certain circumstances, they ought to be able to recall us. As far as I am aware, even Hugo Chavez introduced that in Venezuela. If they can have it, why not us? We certainly ought to respect the views of the people. I think that's where this government has gone sadly wrong, that it seems that we are treated with indifference and disrespect, and their views aren't concerned. We've seen that on a number of occasions, though. And with the greatest respect to the Premier sitting here, I think a lot of that comes, that he exudes that. He has given us that impression on a number of occasions. I've personally felt that on occasion. And that is a sad state of affairs. And when it reaches that stage where your constituents' confidence is eroded in you to the point where they are fed up, they ought to be able to recall you midterm if necessary.
Thank you. Mr. McLaughlin.
I generally don't support such a provision, although if there were parameters around it, I could see how that would work. And the reason for that is both practical and principle. We have a democracy. The reason why the government is because they have the majority of those elected members who support them. The day the government loses that majority, it no longer is the government. That is the check and balance that is there. If things get to a point where it is not viable, then the Premier does what I did. You go to the governor and you say, we can't carry on like this. We can't continue to govern in this way. And then the people which Mr. Jackson spoke about, have the right to do what they will do on the 14th of April. They will decide who the next government is. The danger in that sort of provision being sort of general, there will always be times in a term when your constituents are unhappy about something. Let us take the issue of the domestic partnership bill as an example. Should members be recalled because some of their constituents or a significant number of their constituents don't agree with that bill having been put forward? This is why these things often seem so good, but when you just say them, but when you try to apply them to the way a country and a government and a parliament has to work, especially when you have a government as small as ours, where there are only 19 elected members, and where the balance of power within the parliament is often, as I have experienced, only one. The difference between the number on my side and the other side in the 2013 was one. So you make for very unstable government in these small democracies with such small parliaments if you introduce all of these sorts of provisions which allow the government to change so swiftly.
Thank you.
15 questions down. We have 5 more to go and 1 more round of questioning. So please stay tuned. We'll be back after these short messages.
Feed the family for less with Foster's Pick 5.
Choose from a range of meats including chicken thighs, pork chops, ground meats, beef stir-fry, sirloin steaks, and more, and only pay $19.99 for any 5-packs.
The meat is always fresh and never previously frozen. It's the perfect way to stock up for the week. That's dinner sorted.
Look out for Pick 5 in the meat department at all Foster's supermarket locations.
Foster's, better value because we care.
When companies do well, everyone does well. Not just the business owners, but the employees, other businesses, the government, and even the customers. Seriously, to learn how, let's look at how money flows through a company. When a company sells its goods and services, they receive money, which is called revenue. That money is then split up and used in a number of different ways. Some of the money goes to employees. To keep it simple, we'll call this salaries. Some of the money goes to pay for products and services the company needs to keep running. Those expenses are called overheads. Some of the revenue goes to the government in duties and fees. And finally, any money left over goes to the owners of the business as profit. So no matter what products or services a company provides, it's like a machine that takes in money as revenue and spits money out as salaries, overheads, government fees, and profits. It's really that simple. Every dollar that a company takes in gets turned into one of those 4 things. Okay, so how does it benefit everyone when companies do well? Let's take a closer look. First, with salaries. Salaries are important for the economy because most people get most of their income from their employment. Next, government fees. In the Cayman Islands, the vast majority of the government's revenue comes from duties and fees paid by businesses. That money goes to pay for important government services like education, emergency services, healthcare, and infrastructure. Then we have overheads. Quite simply, one company's overhead is just another company's revenue. When a hotel needs supplies, they buy them from local suppliers. Those suppliers turn that revenue into salaries, overheads, duties and fees, and if they're lucky, profit. Some people think that business owners make too much money, but the truth is, the average company only makes 7.5 cents in profit for every dollar in sales. And that's assuming they make a profit at all. The other 92.5 cents goes to pay for salaries for staff, overheads that become revenue of other companies, and duties and fees that pay for the government services we need. In order to become successful, most business owners have to work extremely hard and take a lot of risks. If it wasn't for the ability to make a profit, the owner wouldn't have started the business in the first place. And if nobody started any businesses, there would be no jobs for employees, which means no salaries, no overheads to support other businesses, and no money from government fees to pay for our government services. So yeah, when companies do well, everyone does well. In the next video, we'll take a closer look at why countries need economic growth. For now, thanks for watching. And remember to share this video with your family and friends so they can learn more about our economic prosperity engine. Most people want the same basic things in life. They want to be safe, healthy, happy. They want a good job. In a word, people want prosperity. So how can we create more prosperity for Caymanians? Another way to say prosperity is standard of living. There are 3 basic ways to improve the standard of living. First, the government can spend more money on services like healthcare, education, or infrastructure. That would make life better for Caymanians. But it would also cost more money, which means more government fees. So it might bring a better standard of living, but it would also increase the cost of living. The second way to improve living standards would be to reduce the cost of living. A lower cost of living means people have more money to spend on other things. But in a modern economy, for the most part, the cost of living isn't something that the government can directly control. The third way to improve living standards would be to increase salaries. Raising salaries has the same effect as reducing the cost of living, because it gives people more money to spend. If only there was some way we could increase salaries, increase government revenue, and decrease the cost of living all at the same time. There is. It's called economic growth. In the last video, we saw how companies turn revenue into 4 economic outputs, including duties and fees and salaries. So in order to improve government services without increasing anyone's government fees, and at the same time increasing salaries, companies need to make more revenue so they can afford to pay more money in salaries and duties and fees. And that's what economic growth is. Companies making more revenue and turning it into more money in salaries, overheads, government fees, and profits. But wait, what about the cost of living? Is there a way economic growth can reduce the cost of living? Yes. Have you ever wondered why most things cost so much less in the United States? That's because companies there sell a much greater quantity and can therefore afford to make less on each individual sale. Economists call this economies of scale. The fact that a growing economy raises living standards and creates prosperity is one of the few things that all economists agree on. It's what people mean when they say, a rising tide lifts all boats. In the next episode, we'll start looking at how we could help the economy grow. For now, thanks for watching. And remember to share this video with your family and friends so that they can learn more about our economic prosperity engine.
March in Cayman is hot, but at Foster's, it's frozen.
Frozen Food Month is back, and we're giving away 4 $250 Foster's cards. To enter, just purchase any 3 products from the frozen department from now until March 27th. It's that easy.
You could grab a frozen pizza for dinner, frozen berries for a morning smoothie, and frozen plant-based sausages for something different.
Exactly. Just don't forget to enter online at fosters.ky/Frozen Food Month. Foster's, better because we care.
Welcome back to the Chamber of Commerce Candidates Forums for Red Bay. Now we turn to the final round of questions, and for the first question, I'll turn it over to Mr. Shamari Scott.
Thank you, Will. Mr. McLaughlin, this question will start with you, and it has to do with the cost of living. The top issue in the Chamber's recent survey was cost of living. What specific measures would you recommend to help reduce or alleviate the cost of living for all residents in the Cayman Islands?
Cost of living is always a top issue in every election I've ever stood. And it is very common for candidates, especially new candidates, to say we have to do something about the cost of living. When they get into government, they realize how limited the tools that are available to government actually are in an economy set up the way ours is, with no form of direct taxation, no price controls, very open economy. One thing that government can do, and we have sought very hard to do, is to avoid increasing the cost of living, because you can believe that the moment government increases the duty on anything, it's going to be reflected at the cashier when you go to pay for it. The converse, though, is not always true. Even when government significantly reduces, or in some cases absolutely removes the duty, you don't see the changes at the cash stand when you check out. So here are some of the things that we have done in the 8 years that we've been in government. We reduced the import duty on durable goods from 22 to 20% for traders. That is, if you are Foster's and you are importing stuff, you pay 20% on it rather than 22, in the hope that that gets passed on. We cut import duty on diesel for the purposes of generating electricity from 75 cents per imperial gallon to 25 cents in an effort to reduce the cost of CUC generating power. I spoke about the stamp duty concessions that we give to first-time Caymanian homeowners, so that if you buy a house for $400,000, you pay no stamp duty at all, because housing is a key part of that overall cost of living that we pay.
Thank you.
Sorry, I had a bit more, but time ran out.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. Mr. Jackson?
Thank you. I hear what the Premier is saying, but I do believe there are many things we can do to help tamp down the cost of living. There's been a lot of talk about raising the minimum wage, but we all know that once we do that, then that will automatically be responded to by way of uptick in the price of goods and services wherever those minimum wage workers work. But we have other things at our disposal that we can certainly, with the right legislative initiatives and the right governance, ensure that consumers in Cayman are protected from things such as overcharging. First, for starters, we can lower the import duty on some essential goods like women's sanitary napkins, baby food, and diapers, all of which are 22%. We need to take a close look at the customs tariff law. But the Premier is right. Removing those things by themselves won't guarantee us a drop in prices, because the vendors mightn't necessarily respond to that because we have never regulated them. But that begs the question, why? We know that the Law Reform Commission started in 2010 and ended in 2015 doing an extensive study on how to implement consumer protection legislation in Cayman. That had a wide array of very competent individuals, including 3 QCs on the Law Reform Commission, that produced this report, this 120-page report. I've looked at it, and I still am at a loss as to why we never brought that legislation so that we could protect, because it's not just about lowering the cost of living, but it's about ensuring that consumers get value for money.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson.
Thank you. 2 minutes went fast, I think.
Okay, our next question focuses on pensions and potential pension reform. Mr. Jackson, to you. The recent withdrawal from private sector pension funds has depleted the ability for many residents to have enough funds when they retire. What ideas would you recommend to address this future shortfall?
Well, this sort of thing really is outside my wheelhouse, but I can tell you that I think we need to make sure that when folks retire, they have money in their pension funds. I understand why the government did what it did, but we probably need to develop some creative ideas on how to refill the coffers, so to speak. There are programs in other countries where there's a generational contract where the younger pension providers, the money's deposited by them is used to then pay the pensions or fund the pensions of retirees. I don't know if that's sustainable here, given the size of our population, but that's one thing we should look at. We could look at other things like earmarking revenue streams from development. We already have done that with, for example, the low-income housing fee. A component of the planning fees prescribed by the development planning regulations is earmarked in the legislation for low-income housing. I don't know if it is attributed that, but we could do something along those lines to raise funds to refill the coffers, so to speak, of the pensions of all of these folks who've had to withdraw monies to survive the COVID lockdown.
Thank you. Mr. McLaughlin.
Thank you. I'm going to take part of this, my time here, to just address the cost of living thing again. One of the things we need to do is to find ways to make our people earn more. Mm-hmm. So minimum wage is one of those, and that process was on the way, the revision of the minimum wage when COVID struck. It'll be completed during the course of this year. And I'm sure that number is going to come out higher than the $6 as currently the case. We raised civil servants' salaries. We raised financial assistance to the most vulnerable from $550 a month to $950 during the course of this term. We've got to find ways to make the more vulnerable in our community be able to earn more. Let me turn quickly to the pensions system. I said even long before I was in politics that the pension system that we put in place was not fit for purpose, because even if everybody contributed to it, $12,000 a year, very few people can live on that in the Cayman context. I know what I say now may not be popular with the Chamber of Commerce, but I believe that the only way forward is to have a government-run pension scheme for the private sector the way we have for the public sector. I think that there's far too much money being spent in the cost of administering these funds, and the people are not benefiting in the way that they should. But there's another bit that is going to have to be grappled with, is that the present contributions that are being paid are not enough to be able to provide the kind of return that you need when you reach 65. Oh, I got some more time. We've undertaken to engage with the Chamber, and indeed we propose with other bodies and individuals in the course of the next term, should we be granted that privilege as a government, to talk about a better way forward for pensions in this country, because we're all thankful that we had the pensions to draw on, because if we didn't, I don't know where we would be as a country, because people did have the benefit of that. But there's no question that having taken that amount of money out of the various funds, that the impacts long-term are going to be pretty grave for many people.
Thank you.
Civil partnerships. Mr. McLaughlin, I think we know the answer to this, but still need to ask you. What are your views on the recently enacted Civil Partnership Act?
I just wish that as a legislature, we could have made that decision ourselves rather than requiring the United Kingdom to do the job that we ought to have done ourselves. And for me, someone who has very strong views about Cayman's the local government's ability to manage our own affairs and to be accountable to our electorate, like we will be on the 14th of April for our stewardship. The loss of the opportunity to abolish Section 81 of the Constitution, which gives the governor the power to enact legislation in that particular area. Because the UK withdrew that offer because the Parliament didn't act in the way it did. I believe that every person is entitled to their right to their sexual orientation, to their private life, to their family life. It is not for us, not for me, to sit in judgment about those things. And therefore, I was the one who moved the domestic partnerships bill in the House, so I don't think anyone need question where my head is and my heart is on that particular issue.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. Mr. Jackson.
Thank you. I think it's a fait accompli in that it's already been passed. Unfortunately, I think the governor, we shouldn't have had to resort to that. I would agree with the Premier in that regard. But I think perhaps some more public consultation would have gone a long way if we had taken the time to explain to the public that a civil partnership, as I understand it, is simply a contractual arrangement between two consenting adults, and it is not intended to displace or remove or injure in any way the normal, ecclesiastical, religious-based type of marriage structure, nor should it ever do that. Folks should be entitled to enter into an arrangement as to their property so that they can co-join in owning property, regardless of their sexual orientation. I know it's a controversial issue, but my view is that we are simply too far down the road now with this issue to even, I don't even know if it's possible for us to change it because it was imposed on us. And I think that it is, we're past that stage where we can do anything about it. So as far as I'm concerned, it's a settled issue.
Thank you, Mr. Jackson.
And staying with you, Mr. Jackson, our next question back to Red Bay and talks about Red Bay safety. What are your plans to address safety and security concerns for the residents of Red Bay, should you be elected?
Well, I spoke to that briefly earlier. I think there is justification to have a small police station, not necessarily with cells and all the other things, but just a station where you have full-time policing based in Red Bay, particularly because in certain instances it may be difficult for police to come from Central Police Station or Bordentown or whatever in an emergency. And I think given the density of the population in that area, the residential population area, given that there have been issues with crime and burglaries and what have you, going as far back as into Patrick's Island, there is justification for having that sort of facility there. I don't think it would cost the government a tremendous amount of money. And I know that there may be standards. I've spoken to some folks who worked in the police and who work in the police services now. Their view is that this is an issue that they will have to sort out internally. They need to justify. They have a methodology for determining where stations go and what have you. But certainly, I think, in as much as the government can influence that decision, it should do so. It should ask for a police station because it simply is. It makes sense. You can't have, you can't have to rely on police officers arriving from Central Police Station when you have a break-in or something of that nature.
Thank you. Mr. McLaughlin.
I actually think we have done much better over the course of this past term since we introduced community policing with issues in the Red Bay Prospect area. Because Red Bay and Prospect are really one community. There are two separate constituencies for electoral purposes, but it's really one community. I think we warrant more than just one community officer, given the size of the area, although the current officer actually lives in the constituency, so it's very, very helpful to have him there. I believe we need to, although there are some areas within the Red Bay Prospect community that have neighborhood watches, one of the things that if I'm reelected, which will promote, is organized neighborhood watches. We have a very close community there. I mentioned the various community chats that exist. And quite frankly, if a dog goes missing or a pet rabbit, it's on the chat so that people be talking to each other all the time. And that helps keep the community safe and informed about a whole range of issues, whether it's the electricity gone or internet down. It doesn't matter what it is, it's on the chat, one of the chats. So we have a very close community already. And I think if we move now to organizing neighborhood watches, that we will significantly increase the overall safety of those two communities.
Thank you.
I have the pleasure of asking the last question. So I will start with Mr. McLaughlin, and it has to do with a national lottery. The introduction of a national lottery has been discussed for many years as a way of funding education and infrastructure. What's your view on introducing a national lottery?
Well, I generally don't support gambling of any kind. That's a principle I have. And I've said this from time I stood for election, so no one should be surprised by my saying that. But beyond that, I think it's wrong in principle for government to have to rely on people using their hard-earned money to buy in the hope of winning some ticket for key infrastructural needs. Government must do, as my government has done over the course of these last 8 years, make provision for the things that are of national priority, manage the finances of the country in a way that allow you to allocate the significant funds that are necessary for education, for healthcare, for whatever those needs, infrastructure needs may be.
Thank you, Mr. McLaughlin. Mr. Jackson?
I have a more open-minded approach to a national lottery, but I would have to agree that there are many cases, for example, in the ABC Islands, Aruba and Curacao, etc., Bonaire, where there has been legalized gambling and there have been serious social issues. The concern has always been that, the folks that gamble are the ones who can least afford it, and they become addicted to it, and that it creates then a whole array of social problems. People simply, taking money that should be spent on food for their kids to buy lottery tickets, etc. So there's that raft of problems that we don't want. This would have to be approached very carefully. I would agree with the Premier that we should be able to find other ways to fund education. And there's an obvious way to fund infrastructure, which is to have the developments that cause the impact on infrastructure. This is the approach taken by every other country on earth, as far as I know, that they pay for major developments that require extra wings and hospitals, extra school rooms being built because the developments do grow the population, that they pay for the infrastructural upgrades that are necessary. And there's ways to do that. We could follow the UK legislation in that regard. So I don't think it is necessary, and we certainly shouldn't use the need for infrastructural upgrades to justify a national lottery.
Well, thanks to candidates. 20 questions. Well done. We got through them all.
Is that a record?
Oh, pretty close. But it's thank you very much. Now what we're going to do is going to take a break. And when we return, we'll have closing statements from each of our candidates. Please stay tuned.
Feel like a trial.
Behind everything we do is a promise. Better. Better because we care, because we all have a common goal. To be better at cooking, to be better at eating right and taking care of ourselves, to live in a better community, to just feel better. Today and tomorrow and the next day. Do it for you. Do it for them. Do it to prove something to yourself. Do it to carry on a family recipe.
or just because. But when you aim for the stars, better just works. We're Fosters. And we're better. Because of you, because of them, because of this place. And because we care. Behind everything we do is a promise. Better. Better because we care, because we all have a common goal. To be better at cooking, to be better at eating right, and taking care of ourselves, to live in a better community. To just feel better. Today and tomorrow and the next day. Do it for you. Do it for them. Do it to prove something to yourself. Do it to carry on a family recipe. Or just because. But when you aim for the stars, better just works. We're Fosters. And we're better. Because of you, because of them, because of this place. And because we care.
Welcome back to the Chamber of Commerce Candidates Forum for Red Bay. Reached that stage in the evening where we have closing statements, and we're going to begin with Mr. Samuel Jackson.
Thank you, Will. I'd like to say, first of all, thanks very much to the Chamber of Commerce and you gentlemen for hosting us, providing us with this opportunity to answer very salient questions. I would like to say to the folks of Red Bay that if they would give me the opportunity to represent them, I intend to prove to them that I will approach this with the same kind of diligence and competence that I've always brought to the fore with regards to representing clients. I will speak to them, I will listen to them, I will take on board their concerns, and I will do my utmost best to solve their problems as quickly and as practically as possible through the necessary legislative initiatives and policy guidelines, etc. I believe that there is a better way to represent the constituents of Red Bay, and I intend to do that with the utmost integrity, to use my experience and competence to represent them as best as possible.
Well, thank you very much. Now the closing statement from Mr. Alden McLaughlin.
Thank you, Will. I also wish to thank the Chamber of Commerce again for hosting not just us, but this entire series of debates. I think a very, very important part of the elections process. It gives many people who otherwise would not necessarily hear or see what candidates are thinking and proposing the opportunity to do so. I want to say that it's been an honor and an absolute privilege to be an elected representative for now almost 20 and a half years. This is my sixth run for a seat, again in the constituency of Red Bay and Prospect, well, Red Bay and Prospect area. And it has been an absolute privilege to represent the people of Red Bay over the course of these 4 years. I have tried, despite my significant other obligations as Premier and Minister, to always address the various issues that the people of Red Bay and Prospect tell me and my government matter to them. That's why we have charged ahead with the purchase and development of land for a park in the Prospect area, Victory Avenue and Prospect Drive area, why I'm proceeding with trying to identify land for a park in the Selkirk Drive area, why we have put in as many drains as we have, because we know that the land in that area tends to flood, and to pave as many roads and address as many issues with lighting as we possibly can. I've done my very best to attend as many meetings of the Prospect and Red Bay Community Group as I possibly could, and I have always made myself available via phone or otherwise to my constituents. I know from the number of you who have responded to me that you believe that I have done a good job. But I want to go beyond that. I will not be premier again. At best, I will be a minister. Perhaps that will give me even more time to address issues within the constituency. But beyond that, as a voter, you need to be thinking about what the next government is going to look like, how it is going to be made up. We are, I think, in this country, living in something of a bubble, and it may cause us to not understand the challenges that lie ahead with the continued management of the pandemic and the reopening and rebuilding of our economy. That is going to require a united government. Individual independence will not be able to do so. And so I urge you to vote for a government that you have seen is able to work and
thank you, sir.
And have confidence in.
Now I'm going to turn it over to President of the Chamber. 2.5 minutes.
Now around half a minute ago.
We were a bit,
sorry.
Gave you a little bit more. Turn it over to President Mike Gibbs for some closing comments.
Thank you, Will. On behalf of the Chamber Council and staff, I would certainly like to thank the Red Bay candidates for participating in this evening's forum. I trust the forum will help the Red Bay voters to determine who to vote for when you go to the polls on April the 14th. I would also like to thank Foster's for their major sponsorship of the Chamber's candidate forums, as well as Affinity, Bodden's Legal and Corporate, and DART. If you're interested in viewing more of the Growth Matters video series that have been playing during tonight's commercial breaks, they can be accessed at growthmatters.ky. Please join us tomorrow night as we welcome Mr. Dwayne Seymour from the constituency of Boddentown East. Thank you for tuning in, and I hope you will join us tomorrow evening at the same time. Good night.
March in Cayman is hot, but at Foster's, it's frozen.
Frozen Food Month is back, and we're giving away 4 $250 Foster's cards. To enter, just purchase any 3 products from the frozen department from now until March 27th. It's that easy.
You could grab a frozen pizza for dinner, frozen berries for a morning smoothie, and frozen plant-based sausages for something different.
Exactly. Just don't forget to enter online at fosters.ky/frozen food month. Foster's, better because we care.